Hello everyone, my name is Agosto. I'm a PhD student in computer science at the Faculty of Informatics of the Autonomous University of Querétaro, Mexico. In this video, I'm going to present the article titled Multiregional Characterization of Traditional Street Cries in Mexico Using Acoustic Parameters. This study aims to quantitatively characterize Mexican street cries, well known as pregones, by exploring a range of acoustic parameters and examining potential prototype distinctions across geographical regions. I will briefly explain the context, methods, main results, and conclusions of this study. Street cries have been part of the urban soundscape in different regions of Mexico for centuries, becoming an integral element of popular culture and exhibiting distinctive acoustic properties that may vary across geographical areas. However, despite their cultural and social relevance, an objective distinction of potential regional variants has received little attention from a quantitative perspective. To date, street cries have been studied primarily within the social sciences for historical, socioeconomic, and cultural perspectives. Sharma even considers them as an acoustic phenomenon, since one consequence of urbanization is the introduction of motorized machines such as vehicles and their increased use, leading to heavier street traffic, higher decibel levels, and forcing street vendors to cry out their products or services at much higher volumes than before in order to be heard above the noise. From this perspective, street cries appear to represent another case within the acoustic adaptation hypothesis, for which there is extensive research across different animal species, including birds, mammals, insects, and anurans. This possible adaptation is driven by two main objectives. On the one hand, to be heard by as many people as possible, and on the other, to increase sales. However, from a scientific perspective, this phenomenon can be analyzed through acoustic parameters, which have been extensively studied and widely applied in various investigations to characterize phonatory phenomena, such as evaluating voice quality in patients with voice disorders, or identifying significant difference between spoken and sung tasks. Figure presents the methodological framework implemented in the present study, outlining the main stages of the process from data acquisition to classifier evaluation. In this stage, samples were obtained from the downloadable audio files of the Mapa Sonoro de México and classified into three geographical regions: North-Northeast, Center-West, and South-Southeast. This classification only considered states from which audio samples were available. All select files were preprocessed using SoundForge Audio Cleaning Lab 4. The parameters were adjusted as follows: the hisser at 40% and the noiser configured between 60 and 80%. In addition, the noise suppression function of Clipchamp was applied to automatically remove unwanted background noise and improve sound quality. For each select audio file, sections in which background noise predominate over the street cry were removed, as well as cries in language other than Spanish. From all the clean segment extract, a window size of 3 seconds was selected, considering that this length could represent the minimum window necessary to distinguish a street cry from other types of speech. It is important to note that more than one window may originate from the same audio file. The acoustic parameters used to characterize the audio files were jitter, shimmer, pitch, the standard deviation of pitch, the mean values of the formats 1, 2, 3, and 4, and the standard deviation of the difference between these formats. Jitter calculates the cycle-to-cycle period perturbations of successive glottal cycles during sustained phonation. Shimmer assesses the perturbation of the amplitude of the sound wave across consecutive periods. That is, it quantifies the variability in intensity or energy between successive cycles of vocal folds vibration during speech. Fundamental frequency also known as pitch, it's directly associated with the vibration of the vocal folds and corresponds to the number of times the glottis opens and closes within 1 second. Formants are the resonant frequencies of the vocal tract that generate regions of higher spectral intensity. They are commonly denoted as F1, F2, F3, etc., ordered in ascending frequency. The extraction of acoustic features was conducted with Pratt software, using its default hyperparameter settings. The resulting data were then standardized using Z-scores to normalize the acoustic variables and mitigate scale-related differences, thus enabling meaningful comparisons. Class balance was achieved by means of random sampling. For an initial exploration of the acoustic parameters, Kendall's correlation coefficients were computed to identify monotonic associations with absolute value of tau greater than zero point 0.6. Its application is justified when the variables under analysis do not meet the assumption of a bivariate normal distribution, a requirement for the proper use of Pearson correlation. In the Kendall correlation matrix of acoustic parameters across all regions, only formants 2 and 3 show a positive monotonic association above zero point 0.6. This may indicate that there's no excessive redundancy among most of the variables when considering the three regions together. With the aim of identifying the most relevant acoustic dimensions within the parameters, principal component analysis was applied to reduce the complexity of the entire dataset and to explore potential structures that enabled improved interpretability and visualization of the results. The number of principal components that explain at least 80% of the cumulative variance was selected, as this is considered adequate to retain most of the structure of the original data. To analyze the relative contribution of each variable, the loadings associated with each principal component were normalized. Parameters with a higher relative weight allow for the distinction of two groupings. PC1, PC2, and PC4 are mainly associated with the vocal tract, jointly explaining 60.69% of the cumulative variance. In contrast, PC3 and PC5 are related to the vocal folds, with a cumulative variance of 20.34%. Subsequently, to identify which dimensions in the common PCA space best distinguish the street cry classes, the Euclidean distance between the centroids of each class was calculated, considering all possible combinations of PCs in 2D and 3D spaces. To obtain more robust centroids, the instances corresponding to the 10% of points farthest from the initial centroids were removed. Likewise, all combinations were evaluated to determine those in which the largest differences were observed, that is, the greatest distances between the centroids of each region with respect to the others. The 2D and 3D combinations with the greatest distance between the recalculated centroids were PC1, PC2, and PC1, PC2, PC5 respectively. These spaces are those that exhibit the greatest distinction among the street-cry regions. From the contrast of each region against the other two considered as a single set, the best combinations in the PCA space with the greatest centroid distances in 2D and in 3D were the following. To achieve a sample size that would improve the generalization capacity of the classifiers, the mix-up augmentation technique was applied. The static linear method was implemented, which generates a new instance through a linear combination, as well-known interpolation, of two vectors. The classes were balanced to 300 instances, retaining all original ones and completing the remainder with synthetic instances selected at random. In all comparisons for each parameter between the distributions of the original instances and those including synthetic instances, the non-parametric Kolmogorov-Smirnov test yielded no statistically significant p-values. suggesting that there's no evidence of statistically significant differences between the original data and the augmented datasets. Consequently, it is valid to increase the sample size by employing synthetic instances in order to enhance the generalization capacity of the classifiers. In this stage, the support vector machine, random forest, and k-nearest neighbors classifiers were compared to evaluate the learning performance of these models and to identify the most efficient one for distinguishing regional streetcry classes based on the select acoustic parameters. In the hyperparameter tuning of the classification models, the best combination were determined for the original data, normalized and balanced original instances. For the augmented data, normalized and balanced original plus synthetic instances, the best combinations were the following. During the analysis, the performance metrics, accuracy, precision, and recall were obtained. For the precision and recall metrics, the macro average was employed. The models exhibit satisfactory performance with the original and augmented data. In the rock curves 1 versus rest of the original data, all three classes demonstrated substantial discriminability, with North-Northwest class exhibiting the highest degree of separation from the others. Since the street cries from the center-west and south-southwest regions are the least distinguishable from each other, a binary rock curve CW versus SSE was included, with center-west set as the positive class in order to quantify the specific separability between these two classes. Some of the limitations of this study concerned the acquisition of the samples, as they were obtained from a repository containing recordings made with different equipment and at varying sampling frequencies. The quality of the desired signal depended on ambient noise and the applied filtering, which limited the duration of the audio samples and affected the parameter values. A larger sample size is also recommended in order to obtain more representative and robust results. Window size is a parameter that can be further explored with different lengths to assess its impact on the results. Additionally, some acoustic parameters are particularly sensitive to background noise, for example, the pitch. In the 2D and 3D combinations with the greatest centroid distance, there's greater distinction between the street cries of the CW and NNE regions, whereas between the CW and SSE regions, a lower degree of differentiation is observed. However, when comparing each region against the rest, the NNE cries exhibit the highest degree of distinction, in contrast with those from SSE, which show the least differentiation. In the context of a strict rise, the presence of principal components PS1 and PS2 associated with a vocal tract in all combinations with the greatest centroid distances suggests that differences exist among the prototypes of regional strict rise, linked both to the formants and to their variability. This may represent an intrinsic strategy in the production of strict rise, arising from differences in vowel content that generate dynamic changes in the vocal tract. However, PC5, associated with the vocal folds due to the weight of pitch, plays a relevant role in the differentiation among classes, including in the distinction of the SSE region from the others, whose prototype is the least distinguishable within the set. As a result of the performance metrics and ROC curves across the different classification models, it can be inferred that the acoustic parameters jitter, shimmer, pitch, the standard deviation of pitch, the mean values of the formants, and the standard deviation of the interformant differences can be used to characterize street cries from different regions of Mexico, particularly those defined in this study as NNE, CW, and SSE. Future work should implement a more robust experimental design for sample acquisition and investigate additional acoustic parameters, together with strategies employing alternative clustering or classification tools to achieve a more comprehensive characterization. Moreover, exploring a different distribution of Mexican regions may allow the identification of new classes. This has been my entire presentation. Thank you for your attention and have a nice day.